is about the Hoosier Resilience Index. And so it's going to be a little bit different than what we're used to, but instead of having external speakers, you're just going to hear from me and from our moderator, Janet McCabe. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded, and so you will be able to share it with your colleagues when the webinar is over, and we'll post it online and we'll share that link with you. Additionally, we hope that all of our participants will remain muted during the webinar, and you can unmute yourself at the end if you have any questions, and you're certainly willing to participate at that time. If you have any questions while we're talking, you're welcome to enter those questions into the chat function, which you can find if you hover your mouse over the screen, over the Zoom screen, and you'll see a chat option pop up. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Janet McCabe, who is the director of the Environmental Resilience Institute.
All right, well, thanks, Andrea, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. We're pretty excited about this webinar and glad to have you. I think we have some people who may not have joined an ERI webinar before, so we're very pleased to have you. We're really excited to be sharing with you today a brand new tool that has been developed at Indiana University that really puts climate projection data, Indiana-specific climate projection data, right in your hands and provides a tailored list of preparedness actions for every single county and incorporated city and town government in the state of Indiana. And as far as we know, there is nothing like this out there, so we're pretty thrilled. Before we talk about the Hoosier Resilience Index, which Andrea is mostly going to do, and I need to make sure that everybody knows that the index would not exist if it weren't for Andrea Webster and her leadership over the last year or more to pull this together with many, many partners. I just am going to do a quick overview for everybody about the Environmental Resilience Index, assuming that some of you are new to the Institute. So the Institute is a creation of the Prepared for Environmental Change Grand Challenge, which was announced by President McRobbie about 2 years ago, a significant effort for Indiana University to address issues of how climate change is affecting Indiana and will affect Indiana, bringing to bear resources from across the many areas of expertise at Indiana University, both at our main campus in Bloomington and our satellite campuses as well. We have a number of tools that Andrea and I have been working on, in addition to the immense research capacity that IU has, which is a subject for another day if you're interested in that. But just to mention a couple of very specific community-oriented tools that the Environmental Resilience Institute has developed and is promoting for cities and towns across Indiana. You'll hear about the Resilience Index today. That's the newest one. The first one is called the Environmental Resilience Institute Toolkit. That's an Indiana-specific, Midwest-specific, I should say, database website where local government personnel in Indiana and the Midwest and anywhere, as well as others, can find information specifically about climate change challenges for the Midwest and Indiana, and about tools, resources, training, grant opportunities, and importantly, case studies of resilience-oriented activities that have been implemented by your peer communities, small to mid-sized Midwestern communities, and a lot of information about how they did that and how you might be able to look at doing some of those things without having to reinvent the wheel. That's based on a national database developed by the US EPA, actually by one of the attendees on the website today. So I'll give a little shout out to Joel Sharaga for his incredible work on that database. I want to draw your attention to the third one there, the Indiana Sustainability Development Program. This is a program that is run out of Sustain IU, but we partner with them. This is a program that will provide an Indiana University sustainability undergraduate or graduate student for 10 weeks in next summer to work on a sustainability or resilience project of your design. Last year, we placed about 30 students in cities and towns, businesses, and nonprofits all across the state to help them with everything from looking at a greenhouse gas inventory to recycling programs, all kinds of things. It's a really terrific program, and I commend it to you. The deadline for people who would like to host an intern is December 13th. So go to that website if you're interested. There's a pretty simple application process. And if it's daunting to you, we have people who can help you put the application together. And then what we'll do is see how many spots we have, choose the recipients, and then advertise those to our students. So please consider that if that's something you think would be useful. In addition, on every month, we host a webinar the second Wednesday of the month from 12 to 1 on a resilience-related topic. These topics are chosen based on input and feedback we get from you, our listeners, and we usually have an expert on whatever that topic is, as well as somebody from Indiana who has actually implemented that activity or worked on it at the local level. So that we have real live experience. So our next one in December is going to be on zoning codes and plan strategies. We're actually going to have somebody from Drake Law School who's overseeing a really huge, impressive project to collect best practices for local zoning ordinances. So all kinds of stuff to come. As Andrea said, there will be a recording of today's webinar available on the ERI website. We also can provide a copy of the slides at your request. We're not allowed to actually post the slides on our website because of accessibility issues, but if you'd like a copy, please let us know. I want to thank our webinar co-hosts, the Association of Indiana Counties, Accelerate Indiana Municipalities, as well as two of our public health organizations in the state, the Indiana Public Health Association and Health by Design. We're grateful that they think that these are useful. Let me think. We have many people who signed up for the webinar today, and quite a few of them have actually dialed in. That's always nice.
I found this on the web.
I'm glad you found it on the web. We hope that lots of people find it on the web. So please spread the word about all of these resources. So now I think we are ready to head to the main squeeze today, which is the Hoosier Resilience Index. And we're going to start with a very short video. And after that, Andrea will pick up and walk you through this tool.
A few years back, we had an intense rainstorm, a heavy, intense rainstorm over a short period of time, and it caught us by surprise. We were told, well, this was a 100-year rain event. This is not something that would most likely happen again. And 9 months later, we had another rain event of similar magnitude. About 8 to 9 months later, we had the third event. And then it became very apparent that this is not just a one-off. I look back to that first event, I didn't have an answer. I was looking for anything that explained to my council, but more importantly to my public, is this going to be something we have to deal with on a regular basis? And if I can share that information, find a resource that allows me to tell the story properly to those who live in my community, there's tremendous value in that.
The goal of the Environmental Resilience Institute at IU and the Prepared for Environmental Change Grand Challenge is to put accurate and useful information in the hands of decision makers in Indiana so that they can be prepared and be more resilient in the face of environmental change. The Hoosier Resilience Index is a tool that's available right now for local governments in Indiana, cities, towns, and counties to help them understand their vulnerabilities. The index will have two parts. In part one, every city, town, and county in the state will be able to see information specific for them on how much warmer it's going to get and how much more precipitation they can expect. The second part is something that communities can choose to do, where they can go through a set of questions organized by topic area that will allow them to see how how ready they are for increases in temperature or increases in precipitation and flooding.
One of the critical components in municipal government is planning out into the future, comprehensive planning, long-term planning. I don't think ever before we've had a tool that would allow us to look at environmental factors as an overlay into that planning process. I think that's something that the Resilience Index is going to give us, something that I think will be an extremely valuable and useful tool for many years.
Having this as a resource to me, especially for smaller communities, being able to partner with IU and find a tool that can help us, and not only the data that's there, but the staff behind it is something that's very important.
All right, well, with that, we're going to move to the core of the presentation, and then we will move over to hri.eri.iu.edu to show you what the site actually looks like. So it's very much true that flooding and is happening in Indiana, and that climate change is happening in Indiana, and we've seen that. These are pictures of floods that have happened right here in the state. There's one here in northern Indiana in 2018. I know we've experienced some flooding in southern Indiana in many places, and so it's becoming more common. And it's also true that there is this false rhetoric that people in the state of Indiana do not care about climate change, or that they do not believe, if you want to use that term, they do not believe that climate change is actually happening. But as I said, that is false rhetoric, and some preliminary surveys that we have conducted show that that is not the case. And in fact, instead, we are finding that 4 out of 5 Hoosiers believe that climate change is happening, and that 3 of 4 support efforts to address the impact of climate change. So this is an issue that we really need to address in the state, and that our residents expect us to address. And so we're excited to present the Hoosier Resilience Index to help local governments move forward with that goal. Temperature is also increasing across the state. As you can see there, from 1985 to 2015, you can see the trend line is increasing. And if you look at it even more recently, from 1955 forward, that trend line is much more steep. So the Hoosier Resilience Index is a tool to help local governments in the state of Indiana. So it's a tool that's designed for every single county government and every single incorporated town in the state. And we envision this tool as something that will allow any resident of the state, or really anybody around the world, since it's on the internet, can log on and click on any county and view any incorporated city or town's information, their climate projection information. We also have designed this tool so that communities can use it to measure their readiness to respond to these long-term climate changes, and that they can start to select which initiatives they would like to do to be better prepared, and then track their progress over time. So overall, the Hoosier Resilience Index provides climate projection data from credible sources that are locally relevant and publicly available. And the tool can serve the purposes of the community. So this is not meant to be a statewide ranking exercise. Instead, it's a self-evaluation tool that local governments can use, and they can work through their own process for completing the index and using the information that it provides. This past summer, so the Hoosier Resilience Index was released yesterday online, as I said before, at hri.eri.iu.edu. And this past summer, we were very lucky to have 4 communities volunteer to beta test the tool. And we received lots of valuable input. We wanted to make sure that this tool was useful to them, and that we were presenting the data in a way that's understandable and useful. And so through that process, I think we are thankful for them, and I think all the future users of the Hoosier Resilience Index are also thankful for their review. And of course, the tool is now live, but we do plan to continue to improve it as we receive input from all of you. So it's a tool that's divided into two parts. We have climate vulnerability and readiness assessment. In part one, under climate vulnerability, we have aggregated publicly available data and data from the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment to present information on extreme heat, extreme precipitation, floodplain land use, and social vulnerability. So all this information is aggregated into one place on our website, and you can interact with the data as it relates to your individual hometowns. Part two is a readiness assessment that provides readiness scores once it's completed. Whereas part one is available to anybody who accesses the website. Part two that offers a tailored readiness assessment that is only available to local government employees across the state. So if you work for an incorporated city or town government, or if you work for a county government, you can submit your name through a form to us, and we will respond with a readiness assessment that is tailored to your individual community, which we'll get into a little bit in more detail later. So once you complete that readiness assessment, you'll receive some readiness scores to give you a sense of how you're doing and how prepared you are for the changes that will happen in your community specifically. The readiness assessment is divided into 8 worksheets that we hope align with many of the departments that you probably have within your local government. And so we don't expect that any one person will be able to answer all 8 worksheets. We expect that we'll have one person who is coordinating the response to all these worksheets, and that person will work with folks across will work with their colleagues across the city government to collect those responses. So as I mentioned, these are the 4 types of data that we provide in the Hoosier Resilience Index. Extreme heat and extreme precipitation come from the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment. The land use and the floodplain data come from the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. They have a best available floodplain mapping tool in which they're continually updating that data set, and those floodplains are even more updated than what FEMA provides currently, although the DNR is working with FEMA to make those, to incorporate their information into the FEMA's mapping tool. We also use data from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They have a land use data set that shows us exactly how land is used across the state, specifically in 2010. And for social vulnerability, we pull in information from the U.S. Census and run it through a methodology that has been developed by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, otherwise known as the CDC. So on the tool, we provide 2 interactive maps. We have a state level map and we have a community level map. So the state level map gives us a sense of what's happening across the state as a whole. And so we can look at heat and precipitation and developed land in the floodplain. For heat and precipitation, you can also look at current heat and precipitation amounts. And you can look at 2 different scenarios for the 2050s. You can look at a medium emission scenario and a high emission scenario. And that medium emission scenario says that as a globe, all the countries will work together and we will achieve some amount of greenhouse gas reduction. Whereas the high emission scenario says that we will continue business as usual and we will not significantly reduce our greenhouse gases in any way. And so providing both of those scenarios provides local governments and residents with a range of what can be expected on the low end and on the high end. We often get the question, is there a low emission scenario? And the answer to that is that there was, but we've already surpassed that amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So we present just the medium and the high emission scenarios. In the community level map, we provide the 100-year and 500-year floodplains, information on land use, and information on social vulnerability. So we'll show you an example of that today. So this is Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so you can see the floodplains, which are indicated in blue. And you can see how they go wider than what the actual rivers in that area or the streams in that area, what they cover. And the area in peach is pasture, and the area in gray is developed land. And so Fort Wayne, or anyone really, can go on the website and they can pull up this map and you can zoom in and you can turn layers on and off. And so you can see, for example, where a developed portion is intersecting with the floodplain right here. And so you can also switch the base map, which will show, so you can really get a sense of where that is in your community. As I mentioned before, we also share information on social vulnerability. So we're pulling in information from these 15 indicators from the US Census. So we have below poverty, single parent households, speaking English less than well, crowding or no vehicle, and we've aggregated those into 4 separate categories. And the 5th, which is just overall vulnerability. So this is based off the 2013 to 2017 American Community Survey. And so to give you a sense of what that looks like, I have Muncie, Indiana for you here. And so what you're seeing here is in blue, and this blue line is a census tract in Muncie, Indiana. And so you can see the floodplain, and you can see that the census tract is inundated, or will be inundated with a 100-year or 500-year flood. And so this census tract in particular, if I remember correctly, has 82%, or is in the 82nd percentile for social vulnerability, which means that they're among the highest in the state for being socially vulnerable, socioeconomically vulnerable. So this is something that the city of Muncie, Indiana should take to heart and think about what they can do to help prepare those residents for that flooding. And they can also speak with their planning commission and anyone else making decisions on where buildings are going to go in that community to maybe try to avoid having any more buildings happen where the floodplain is going to occur, or where it already does occur. And as a reminder, so this is socioeconomic vulnerability, so that pulls in below poverty, the folks that are unemployed, income levels, and no high school diploma. So that's how we define socioeconomic vulnerability in this case. So that's part 1 of the Resilience Index. If I jump into part 2, the readiness assessment. So remember that I said before that we have a tailored readiness assessment. So what that means is that for every single community across the state will see a different readiness assessment based on what exists in their community and based on what specific climate vulnerabilities they will experience. So for example, there are about 130 communities in Indiana, cities or towns, that do not have any floodplain at all within their jurisdiction. So they do not need to be worried about river flooding. So their tailored readiness assessment does not ask them questions and suggest actions about what they should do to prepare for river flooding, because it's just not relevant. So I mentioned that this readiness assessment is only available to be taken as an assessment or completed by a local government. But we do have a PDF on our website, which I'll point you to, that shows every single possible question that a community could see. And that PDF is available to everyone. So anybody could download that. The readiness assessment, as is designed, lists several actions that a local government can take to respond to the climate vulnerabilities that they have. So how we created this assessment is that, how we created the readiness assessment, I should say, is that we pulled information from the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment. So if you've not heard of this, I certainly encourage you to check it out. If you just Google Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment, I think you'll land on this page, which will show the same visual of all the different reports. So this is an assessment that's providing, I guess, 11 different reports. They have 8 out now, and I believe they're coming out with a 9th soon. So this explains in a very easy to read way exactly how climate change will impact the health of people in Indiana, our forest ecosystems, our tourism and recreation. And so not only does it provide climate information, but it also provides how that will impact the various aspects of our state. And so we read through these reports and we pulled out all of the individual impacts that could happen in Indiana. And we prioritized them for a number of things, one of which is what local governments actually have jurisdiction over. And so there are many things that happen as a result of climate change, but local governments can't control everything, as we know. And so so within the readiness assessment, we are not asking local governments to do absolutely everything they can to prepare for climate change. We are limiting it to the things that are going to be the most impactful. So, as I mentioned before, this readiness assessment has 8 different worksheets, which you can see here. We have emergency management, natural resources, planning and land use, public health and safety. And how it's set up is that, so this is the first section, built environment, the first worksheet. And under there, we have 3 impacts. So the first impact says increased stress on roadways, bridges, and transportation systems. And the second one says increased likelihood of river and surface flooding in developed areas. And so what we've done is that under every single impact in the readiness assessment, we have included up to 5 actions that a local government can take to lessen the impact of that impact. So these are actions that a government could take, or they may already be taking. So here's an example. So under emergency management, one of the impacts is increased stress on existing communication systems during extreme weather. And the first action that a local government could take is to identify and address the strengths and weaknesses of your community's existing communication networks. You could also develop and distribute a local, state, and federal contacts list to keep necessary services up and running. So I include this example because many of you right now might be thinking, wow, we already do that. And the point there is that there are plenty of things that a local government does that they should keep doing, because there's plenty of things you're doing already that can help you prepare for climate change. And we want to point those out to you and give you credit for that. So additionally, when we list these specific actions, the question is posed is, are you doing this or not? And this is not a yes or no question. Instead, this is a 1 through 5. So option 1, level 1, says, no, I'm not, my local government is not doing this. Well, we haven't considered it yet. And option 5 says, yes, we've comprehensively done this action, and we're measuring, we have metrics to make sure we're doing it effectively. But most likely, most of the folks in Indiana are not going to be a 1, they're not going to be a 5, they're going to be somewhere in between. So, and the story I like to tell is that when we did this as a beta test this summer, one of our beta testers said to me, you know, I was checking mostly 2s and 3s as I was going through the worksheets, and I was always thinking,
Who's that lady?
I was always checking I was always looking at the next box up, the next level up, to see who I could partner with to make that happen. And so that's what we really want you to be thinking about as you're completing these assessments. So here's another example, natural resources. The impact here is increased likelihood of impacts on the health and beneficial functionality of inland wetlands and waterways. So we can, to try to lessen that impact, we can try to protect our wetlands and maintain and restore them. We can identify waterways that are available for improved ecological management and try to improve their ecology around those waterways and in those waterways. And there's a few other things there too. So these are the types of things that you'll see in the readiness assessment. As I mentioned, communities that complete the readiness assessment will receive scores as a result. So they will receive an extreme heat readiness score, an extreme precipitation readiness score, and a floodplain land use score. And that score will be out of 10. And we will not integrate, if there's a question that is not relevant to your local government. So we learned that there are some communities in the state that just don't have bridges. And so they don't need to prepare their bridges for climate change because they don't exist. And so because that question is not relevant to you, that will not count against you in the score. Instead, we calculate the score and adjust it to 0 through 10, or to 1 through 10 rather. So you'll receive 3 different scores that are 1 through 10. However, if you are a community that does not have a floodplain, then you will not get a floodplain land use score because that's not something that's relevant to you. So once you've completed the assessment, what's next? Well, what's next is that you probably want to think about what you can do to improve. And so the Environmental Resilience Institute offers a number of resources for that. We have the Environmental Resilience Institute Toolkit, which Janet mentioned in the introduction to the webinar, that provides funding opportunities, which is probably many of your first questions. We have a list of Midwestern communities with climate responsive plans, case studies, and so much more. And we have the webinar series, which you're on today. And of course, Janet mentioned the Indiana Sustainability Development Program, which colloquially around the state goes by ISDP. So if you're interested in receiving an IU student to support your work, these are very talented IU students. I've been very impressed by them as I've been working with them over the past couple of years. So I certainly encourage you to consider that. And the application deadline, again, is December 13th to apply for an extern over the summer. So one of the next things you can do once you complete the assessment is to, and complete using the index, you can start to convene a community conversation. And so it's really helpful to get the inputs of the residents in your community to talk about what your community should look like by the 20th. And you can think about doing a vulnerability assessment. You can also talk to your planning commission to make sure that they have seen and are using the tool, or they are at least familiar with where the floodplains are and that the floodplains might be getting bigger, because we expect that we will likely see heavier precipitation events. And you can also use the readiness assessment as a baseline to start making improvements and then plan to repeat the readiness. So there are plenty of ways you can use the tool to improve. All right, so with that, I'm going to open up the website so you guys can all see it. And of course, this is open to the public, and so you are certainly welcome to explore this on your own as well. But for now, I'll give you a walkthrough, and then you can explore it more on your own later. So this is the homepage of the Hoosier Resilience Index. As I said before, it's at hri.eri.iu.edu. And on the first tab here, you can learn more about the index. So we give an introduction, there's a user manual if you're interested in that, if you're interested in the methodologies or accessing a download of all the data that's in the Hoosier Resilience Index. All that is available under the methodology section. And then of course we have some frequently asked questions and trainings. Climate vulnerability and readiness assessment are part 1 and part 2. And so we'll go over those in detail today. So again, here we are on the home page. And so as I scroll down, we can see a statewide overview of how climate change is going to impact our state. And so if I click current, we can see, so this is what's presently happening in terms of extreme heat and extreme precipitation. And you can see the legend and compare it across the state. Now, if I move to the 2050s under a medium emission scenario, the map gets quite a bit redder. And as I move to the 2050s high emission scenario, it's getting redder, even redder still, and we're seeing a lot more raindrops throughout the state to indicate that they can expect more days of extreme precipitation in a decade. So as a reminder, I did not verbally mention this before, but it was on one of the slides. So extreme heat events are defined, and we can see that here, as the average number of days per year with highs 90 degrees or greater, and nights with lows that are 68 degrees or greater. So so this is the average. Extreme heat is the average number of high heat days on average per year, whereas extreme precipitation is the average number of extreme precipitation events per decade. So this is an on average per decade metric, whereas extreme heat is an on average per year metric. But either way, here we're looking at it on a color-coded map so you can get a sense of what the impact would be. So as I scroll down, I'm going to see some empty charts, and that's because I haven't clicked on any of the counties yet. So I'm going to click on Posey County, which is one of the counties that will be most directly affected, or most heavily affected, I should say, by climate change in our state. And so now that I've clicked on Posey County, you can see it says Posey County here, and now we have some data in the map. And so currently, Posey County has about 55 days per year on average with extreme heat events. But by the 2050s, we can expect that they will experience between 100 and 112 extreme heat events per year on average. And you can see the same thing with extreme precipitation events here. And as I scroll down, so we can also see land use. So in Posey County, Posey County is made up, in Posey County, the floodplain is 94,700 acres. And 3% of that is developed. So Posey County isn't doing too bad in terms of how much land they have developed in the floodplain. Of course, there's always room for improvement. So if I scroll back up, I can select developed area in the floodplain. And so now I can see how much developed area is in the floodplain across the state as a whole. And not surprisingly, where we see the darkest green colors is where our largest cities are. And so you can expect that a city is more developed and they've developed more in the floodplain. And so they have a lot more work to do in terms of managing that water that's going to be entering their floodplain more and more. So what can we learn from this map? So I'm not going to read all this today. This is for you to explore at another time. But I want to point out that generally, we can expect that the entire state is going to be impacted by more extreme heat and more heavy precipitation events. So as I scroll down here, it offers some ways for you to interact with the map above. So next we're gonna move over to the climate vulnerability tab. And so I can get there in two ways. I can click climate vulnerability, or I can type in a town to explore. So I saw that we have somebody from Richmond, Indiana. So I'm gonna type in Richmond and select that. Now it's gonna take me to the climate vulnerability page. Scroll down, you can see that the information is already populated for Richmond for me. And how this page is set up is that it walks you through the steps of a climate vulnerability assessment. And so the first step is climate exposure. It asks, what does climate change mean for my community? And so we provide some very specific values. And as I scroll down, we move to community sensitivity, and it asks, does the impact that my community is going to experience, does that matter in my community? And here's some ways you can explore whether that matters or not. And as I scroll down even further, we get to potential impacts. So now you can think about what is the level of disruption to a normal community function. And so in this section, it walks users through who to set at the table to ask these questions about how my community is going to be impacted on a normal day-to-day basis by climate change impacts. And so we suggest several questions that a community could walk through using that. And at the very bottom, we talk about adaptive capacity. So are we ready for these impacts? And so this is what sends you to the readiness assessment. But before we go there, I'm going to go back to the top of the screen somewhat slowly so that I don't make our users nauseous in any way. So as I get to the top here, so we're looking at Richmond, Indiana. And so this looks at extreme heat. And so we're providing even more detailed information for Richmond, Indiana. So we're telling you the number of high heat days you can expect, the number of high heat nights, and the number of high heat days with high heat nights. And so those are defined. You can read the definitions on your own by hovering over the eye next to each data point. So what's really nice about the Hoosier Resilience Index is that it provides information on high heat nights. So what we know is that if our bodies do not have a chance to cool down at night, say there's a heat wave going on and temperatures are not getting below 68 degrees for several nights in a row, that's when we see incidences of emergency room visits increase. And so we felt it very important to include this number. And again, we have extreme precipitation events. So these are defined as a number of precipitation events that are 2 inches or greater. And so one thing to note about this information, and I'm going to highlight this on your screen, is that this data does not convey how hot the days will get or how large the storms will be. These numbers are simply a count of how many times these occurrences are likely to happen. So, so even though, for example, these heavy precipitation events per decade don't look that heavy, don't look like there are that many, they don't say anything about how heavy those precipitation events are going to be. So these could be 2-inch storms, they could be 3-inch storms, 4-inch storms, 5-inch storms, and they also don't say anything about how quickly that rain is going to fall. So keep that in mind as you're looking at this data. The other thing is that we are presenting information on the 2050s, on what's likely to happen by the 2050s. But we know that climate change is not just going to stop at 2050, it's going to keep going. And so as you're starting to think about the future and plan for climate change, think about how these numbers are going to grow. And if you want to see more information about that, you can visit the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment or contact them to get even more information on the 2080s if that's something you're interested in. So as I move down to the community sensitivity section, again, this asks, does it matter in my community? So we're looking at Richmond here, and I know that Richmond has a little bit of a city over there, but I'm going to move it over here. There's a white space here because Richmond is right on the eastern edge of Indiana, and so we're only showing Indiana on this map. But as I scroll down here, I can start to turn on and off different layers. So I'm going to turn on the 100-year floodplain. And that's going to take a minute to load because it's a lot of information that we're pulling into this map. I can also turn on the 500-year floodplain, which I'll just go ahead and do for now. So now you can see the rivers and streams and where the floodplain is in Richmond and around that area. And I can, as soon as it finishes loading, I can zoom in if I'm curious, which I'll probably go ahead and do. All right, so that's going to reload, but now I have a better view of Richmond. And so now there's a couple of options I have. I can turn on land use, which you can see all the different types of land use in the legend here. We show developed areas in the scale of gray, and we have water, working in production, and protected areas. So if I turn on land use classes, which are those subgroups, now I can see how land is used across Richmond. And again, this is a lot of information, so I ask you to be patient as this loads. All right, so now what's interesting is that we can look and we can see where our floodplain is and where that intersects with gray areas, with developed areas. And so Richmond can start to think about how they place their buildings and how they develop their city to make sure that nothing is going in these floodplains. Because we know that, well, this is a 100-year floodplain or a 500-year floodplain now. It's very likely that what the land that is designated as a floodplain is going to increase. And so that geographic area is going to get larger. And so I would certainly suggest, and I'm sure many other climate scientists would suggest, not to continue to develop your city right next to the floodplain either, because those areas are likely to flood just as much as the areas within the floodplain. So you can do all sorts of analysis as you turn these layers on and off. So I'm going to turn off land use classes. And I'm going to turn on socioeconomic vulnerability. So this tells me which parts of my community are most socioeconomically vulnerable and located next to a floodplain. So for example, in this area, these are among the darkest in the state because this corresponds to socioeconomic and it has the darkest green color. And so these are outlined by census tracts in the state. So if I click on, let's see, on this census tract, for example, it's going to highlight. And as I scroll down, I can see the numbers that are affiliated with that specific census tract. So because I've clicked on, so it's here, it says, to see the values in the table above, select the census tract, and one of the people checkboxes is selected. So that's what I just did. And so now I can see that this census tract in Richmond is in the 90th percentile for socioeconomic vulnerability. So this is a census tract that the city of Richmond should be very concerned about when it floods. And so they can start to think about what resources are there or what resources they have to get people out of the way when a flood is coming through. What resources do they have to get emergency vehicles into that area during a flood? Or because this is socioeconomic vulnerability, what resources do these residents have to fix the damage that happened to their homes after a flood? So there's lots of things to consider. The other thing I'll mention about this is that you can also switch the base map. So if I want to look at an aerial view, for example, just like we look at on Google Maps, I can do that. And so as I scroll in, you can really get a sense of what's there. I'm not going to do that now. You guys can do that on your own, and I certainly encourage you to do so. You can look up where your house is. I think that's pretty fun. So as I scroll down, again, we have what can I learn from these maps and charts section. And so it walks you through some different questions you can think about as you're looking at the map, and some words of caution. And so why should I care about developments that are near a floodplain but not in a floodplain? And I mentioned that earlier. It's because these areas are only going to get bigger. So again, there are several questions that you could get a bunch of people around a conference room, pull up this website, walk through these questions, and think about how your local government is able to respond and what general services is climate change going to impact. And again, there are even more questions, as I mentioned before, that you can walk through. So you can ask, what size rain event is the majority of your stormwater drainage able to accommodate right now? And will that be sufficient for the size of anticipated rain events? And what can we do about that? So lots of things to think about. These are just a few of the questions. And I'm sure as you start these conversations that people around the table will bring up even more issues. So with that, I will move us to the readiness assessment. So I'm going to click this button, which if I click readiness assessment is also going to take me to the same screen, to the same part of the website. So this is a page on completing your community's readiness assessment. So as I scroll down, it's going to give me a little bit of information. It tells me what's on this page. So we say what's in the readiness assessment, which you guys have already heard during my presentation, so I'll skip right over that. So this is where anybody and everybody can download a PDF of all the actions that we suggest for local governments in Indiana that they can take to prepare for climate change. So again, this is open to everybody, but the tailored readiness assessment that is only available to local governments, that is available down here. So you'll need to complete this form to receive your tailored readiness assessment. So this will send an email to us, and we hope within 48 hours that we will get back to you with your own unique tailored readiness assessment. So I'm sure that many of you are curious what that looks like, and so I'm very happy to show that to you today. If you're curious on how we use the data, there's a section down here at the bottom that explains that. It's also in the user's manual. So I'm going to bring this screen over here. So for any local government that contacts the Environmental Resilience Institute and says, yes, we are ready to complete the readiness assessment of the Hoosier Resilience Index, they will receive this tool here. So you can see that this is for Example City, Indiana, and this is for the built environment section. This is the impact, this is the action they can take. We have a little description that explains why that action is important to reduce the impact that's above it. And then these are the different levels, as I suggested before. And then there's a place to enter comments. So for example, so if the action is indeed not relevant to local government, there is no way that they have the jurisdiction to do that, or there's some other thing that's absolutely preventing them from doing that action, they can select this option. And then they're encouraged to type in an answer that explains why this does not apply. But anyways, you can select next action, and it goes through the tailored readiness assessment questions for you. So you're also able to click these to move around within the assessment as well, if you want to jump to the emergency management section. So every single community will also receive access to a web page that lists the question and only the questions that will be in the tailored readiness assessment. And so with that, you can print that out, you can save it as a PDF, and then you can use that to work through these questions with your colleagues at the local government. So, and as I mentioned before, once you complete this assessment, I'm not going to walk through all the questions today because that would take too long. But at the end of the assessment, you'll get to a place where it says submit, and you click submit, and a page will pop up immediately with your 3 scores and with some suggestions on resources for how to improve that score. So with that, we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to wrap up there, but I certainly want to open it up for questions. And as a reminder, you're welcome to unmute yourself, which you can do by selecting the microphone. There's a microphone icon that you can turn on and off. Or you're welcome to enter a question through the chat function.
So this is Janet, and while people are thinking about their questions, I'll just note that this was a lot of information to lay on you, and it can be a little challenging to watch a live website like this. So we'd encourage you to go into the website yourself, play around with it, and send us your questions. We're going to be doing as much outreach as we can to get the word out about the availability of this resource. As Andrea mentioned, it's completely voluntary for communities to use if they wish, but we hope that people will find it useful.
So we did have one question come in, and it says, why is only extreme heat a measure and not extreme cold? So Janet, I've been talking for quite a while. Do you want to try to address this one?
Well, there's a couple of answers, and then Andrea can add on. One simple answer is that we didn't want to overwhelm people with too many different metrics. So that's one answer. And extreme heat for Indiana is the significant temperature metric that our climate scientists have identified as a concern for Indiana. There are changes on the other end of the temperature scale. I think more in the direction of getting a little bit warmer overall, having less extreme cold perhaps than we are used to. So we feel that extreme heat is a more significant, compelling metric that people will need to perhaps plan for differently more than planning for extreme cold. Did I get that right, Andrea?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll add that, I think most city and county governments and town governments across the state have a plan for when extreme cold happens, and they have a plan for when a blizzard is happening. They hold the news stations and they make announcements to everybody to stay off the roads. They have state of emergencies to close down the roads. But what communities do not have, or very few communities have, is a heat wave plan. And so, for example, if there's a heat wave coming through, maybe there should be some public announcements on the radio, and maybe you should announce where the cooling centers are located in the community and how people that don't have access to transportation can actually get to those cooling centers. And so what we try to do with this tool is really raise up the issues that communities are probably not thinking about yet.
Well, it looks like people are either completely satisfied or completely overwhelmed or need to get to their next thing. So let me just thank you all for joining, and I'll let you know that we are very available to answer your questions and look forward to much more discussion about the Hoosier Resilience Index in the future. As one last parting comment, nothing is perfect. We know this isn't perfect. And so we welcome not only your questions, but suggestions for if you see something that doesn't look right, certainly let us know. But also if you see things that you think could be improved, we would certainly appreciate hearing about that. So Andrea, do you want to bring an end to this?
Yeah. So so I'll mention one last thing is that, so we had this webinar today, and we will record it, and so you can share the recording with your colleagues. We will also be holding another training on December 2nd. So I will send that in a follow-up email to all registrants so that you have access to that registration page. We'll do the exact same thing we did today, so there's no reason for you all to attend again, but you're certainly welcome to, but we'll be covering the exact same information. But there's another opportunity for your colleagues and your peers to join us. So thank you, everybody. for attending today. We hope you'll use the tool. We hope you'll share it with your friends and your colleagues, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks so much. Bye.